Hey guys, what's up? This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I want to talk to you guys about the logos in the movie 300. Now, before I dive into that, I do want to address, obviously you guys are seeing a bit of a new scenery here. This is because I have recently moved from Berkeley, California back to Indiana. I survived the anti-logos, or hell, if you will, of the Bay Area, and I will be finishing my doctorate, my PhD at the GTU, Graduate Theological Union, remotely. So I'll be doing my comps, my dissertation here from Indiana. And for the time being, this is the makeshift studio that I've kind of set up. So I'd appreciate any feedback from you guys. This is obviously the first video I'm filming from this new location. If you guys have any suggestions or criticisms, I know that for example, the camera is much further away than the way that I had things set up in California, which I guess arguably could be deemed a little bit more informal, where I just set my cell phone on a desk in front of me and sat in a chair. Do you guys like this setup a little bit more? Do you not? Let me know in the comment section. I'd really appreciate your guys' feedback on that. So anyway, with that being said, let's get into it. The movie 300. Now, why am I talking about this movie? One reason is that I recently rewatched the movie, and I hadn't seen it since I was basically in high school. Having new eyes and a new perspective in which I watched the movie, I found it really incredible how much what I would call logos is really in that movie. Now, when I say it's full of logos, what I'm talking about is a sort of subconscious or maybe conscious or subtle defense or celebration or valorization of what we would call the Logoi. The Logoi are the singular aspects or uncreated graces, uncreated energies that compose the Logos. Things like logic, reason, love, truth, justice, glory, honor, respect, stuff like that. And I found it really uncanny how much the movie 300 is really depicting a sort of eternal battle, a sort of eternal dialectic between these values, the logos, and these other, essentially their opposition, which I think is represented by Persia and Xerxes. Xerxes, this god king of man becoming God. And so there's a whole litany of things that I want to talk about and address in terms of this dichotomy and how Persia is essentially representing these narratives that we find here in the Bible. So that's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to move through some of the more central movie scenes in the movie and talk about what I think to be logos and how that's working and how that's playing out. So the movie starts with Leonidas, who becomes the king, the warrior king of Sparta. As a child, essentially demonstrating his warrior-like abilities to become a Spartan in the first place, and he's out there, and even it depicts him killing a wolf, right? And he uses his cleverness, his wittiness, to lure the wolf into a trap, and where it jumps and tries to get him, and then gets stuck in between two rocks, arguably a rock and a hard place, right? So from there, Leonidas then jousts him with the spear right in the back of his throat. He goes back to Sparta and is wearing his kill. This is just the way it shows. The movie shows him then back in Sparta being honored, being, I don't want to say worshipped, but other men, grown men, submitting to him as, I guess, king. So right there we have this sort of demonstration of meritocracy, of competency. Of course, Leonidas is going to be related to royalty and stuff like that. But we see this emphasis on competency. Okay, now this leads into arguably the more famous scene of the movie, and this is the Persian messenger coming to Sparta. Okay, so now we see the Persian messenger come to Sparta, and Leonidas, when the queen is told that there's a messenger and comes to Leonidas, he's actually wrestling with his son, right, the next to be king. And the lessons of that day, he tells his son, is about respect and honor. And he tells him that the true strength of Spartans is the warrior next to them. And for me, I feel like this hints at, the central adage of Jesus Christ when he talks about that to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. And this kind of selflessness or this identification with your neighbor, or in this case, the Spartan next to you, the warrior next to you, is emblematic of this kind of embedded logos within the movie. So from there, he goes and meets with the Persian messenger, right? And immediately, again, I think we see another dichotomy. We see the aesthetic appearance of the Spartans versus the Persian is we see the Persians in kind of this ornate clothing. We see piercings all over the place. Almost every Persian in the movie has a piercing in their nose, their ears, their eyebrows. When we see Xerxes eventually, and I'll show some photos of him, he'll have piercings all over his face, jewelry everywhere, gold, stuff like this. Whereas when you look at the Spartans, I mean, arguably the Persians, Xerxes has more makeup on than the queen of Sparta. And the messenger almost reprimands the queen because she is willing to insert her opinion into the conversations of men, right? And then she says, well, only Spartan women give birth to real men. This is interesting, obviously, because of the voice in which Christianity gives women, but I'm not trying to put too much emphasis on that. I just think it's interesting, right? It's interesting that the movie is depicting the queen with a sort of assertive presence during the Persian messenger. And Leonidas, the king, tells the messenger that, when you're in Sparta, everybody is responsible for their own words. And this is going to lead to him getting kicked into the well, obviously. But what is it that the Persian is bringing to Sparta? Well, he's demanding that Leonidas submit to men. And obviously this is Xerxes, claiming that Xerxes is some god and he's going to do this, and showing the skulls of 5 previous kings that did not submit to Xerxes. One of the central tenets of Christianity is that, you give Caesar what is Caesar's, but you only submit to God. And this is one of the problems that the Roman Empire had with Christians, that Christians wouldn't burn the incense to the emperor because of the central tenet is that we only submit to God. And I'm not saying that that's what this movie is trying to show, but I'm just showing that this pattern, this archetype, this symbolic representation is hinting at this truth. And that Leonidas, the king of Sparta, will not submit to a man. So then this leads to the next scene where Leonidas has to try to go and get the approval of the oracle and the priest up on the hill. So he climbs the mountain there and gets to the top. And what do we see? We see these hideous-looking individuals who are the priests, and they are, in control of the oracle. What is depicted there is an immense corruption, right? So, what does Leonidas have to bring to get a sort of prophecy from the oracle? He has to bring gold coins. He brings money. Then he lays out his whole battle plan in front of these, goofy-looking, blistered-faced priests, and they basically, dismiss what he has to say, and then they induce whatever ritual they do for the oracle. The narrator of the movie, who's actually one of the Spartans, and this becomes obvious at the end of the movie, he describes these priests as pompous, inbred swine, rotten and corrupt, and he talks about how their lust and they have the needs of men, and it shows like one of them when he's trying to hear the whispers of the oracle, he licks her neck, and how the oracle is always chosen from the most beautiful women of Sparta. So we see this this kind of appeal to worldly needs, worldly desires, and that these men who are supposed to be above the world, they're supposed to be priests, are so consumed with the world. And we see this through the money, we see this through the emphasis on the beauty of the oracle, and we see this on their kind of lust for the beauty of the young girls who are the oracles. So, and then it becomes clear once the oracle basically, the priests tell Leonidas that he's going to have to submit. Of course, he rejects this. He leaves. But then what do we find out? That they were already bought and sold by Xerxes, and that there's a Persian in the episode, along with the fellow Spartan councilman who is kind of a Judas entity within the movie. They basically paid the priest and the oracle for the answers that they got, basically trying to tell Leonidas to not go to war, make it easier for the Persians and all this stuff, trying to buy off what's supposed to be a sacred and religious prophecy, a message. That wasn't the case at all. And so right there we see, money. And it reminds me of Matthew 21, 22 through 13, and Mark 11, 15 through 18, which are the two scenes in which Jesus goes into the temple and flips the tables due to the money changers, right? So I'm not trying to say it again that the writers of the movie 300 had these Christian overtones. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say that the pattern is the Logos, and that's why there's such a matchup potentially between biblical narratives and this movie. So in the Bible, in the New Testament, Jesus goes to the temple because what are they doing? They're selling animals. They're trying to, they're getting people to buy the sacrifices they're getting ready to offer into the temple with their Roman coins, and then transitioning them to their Jewish coins, because it was considered defilement to use Roman coins inside the temple. But the whole scheme was to make money. The whole process of the Pharisees, it was nothing about God. It was not about upholding the covenant. It was basically to make money. And this is what we see even now. All the Christian churches are corrupt. You have the Greek Orthodox Church is corrupt. Catholic Church is obviously corrupt. Multiple of these Protestant evangelical churches are corrupt. Anybody who worships, a Zionist who's worshiping the state of Israel is corrupt, whether they're conscious of why they have that theology or not. So this process, this pattern of corruption and money and power related to spirituality, right there is hinted in the narratives of Christ and the money changers. So then we move to Leonidas defies the orders. He claims he's just doing an exercise and brings out his 300 Spartans into the field, and then they start marching on to Thermopylae, to the passageway there between, the two mountains. I'm not sure how you describe that, the valley area. So he, on his way, he comes across other fellow Greeks, and I forget how many soldiers. I should have checked before I made this video. But there's a few thousand different soldiers from fellow Greeks, and the leader of them comes upon Leonidas and says, "Leonidas, you only have 300 soldiers?" And Leonidas starts pointing to his soldiers and says, "What's your profession?" "Oh, well, I'm a blacksmith. I'm a potter. I'm a poet." And then he asks, Sparta, and they all do their chant, demonstrating that they're all Spartans, they're all warriors, they're all soldiers. And then he says, it looks like I've brought more soldiers than you did. The reason why I bring this up as Logos is because I believe it's hinting at the purpose of individuals and personal excellency. So this is another thing embedded within the Christian worldview, is that everybody has a particular purpose, a talent. This is divine providence for your life. And therefore, personal excellency is another virtue. It's a virtue because of the hard work and dedication and discipline it takes to become excellent at anything. So that scene right there, again, hinting at what I would call Logos. So then we move on from there to the sacked city. So after that, the 300 Spartans, they're moving on to where they're going to take their stand, and they come across a city that's totally annihilated. They can't find where the citizens are. Everything's burning. Everything's destroyed. And the only thing left is a young little boy. And the little boy comes, and he ends up falling in the arms of Leonidas. And what they realize is that there's been this, dramatic horror, this annihilation, and that all the city people are nailed to a tree. Okay, so again, right there, I would argue a pretty explicit symbolic reference to biblical narratives. Christ being crucified. There's even depictions that he was crucified against a tree. That's not typical doctrinal tradition that we understand it, crucified on a piece of wood. But you see how it's been described of Christ even being nailed to a tree and stuff like that. So very interesting symbolism there. And then one of the Spartans walks up and says, "Do the gods know no mercy? Do the gods know no mercy?" And then another Spartan perks up and says that this is not the doing of the gods. This is the doing of the Persian ghosts who hunt for human souls, for man's soul. Okay? So the Persian ghosts who hunt for man's soul. So ghosts, now we have a sort of metaphysical, spiritual entity. And what's its job? To hunt for souls. Well, this is the whole demonic enterprise of what we deem to be evil, Satan, the devil, however you conceptualize that. Is that not what is being kind of exemplified here in this narrative? So then one of the other Spartan says, "Oh, this is the immortals, and they can't be killed or defeated." Okay, so the immortals, because they're already dead. That's why they're immortal. They're immortal because they're already dead. And I think that idea is going to play in even further into this movie. But then Leonidas, being the kind of the stoic Logos figure he is, says, "We'll put their name to the test." So from there, eventually they move to where the battle's going to take place. They see all these Persian ships in the ocean, and they see that it's getting ready to rain, and then there's a major storm, and a bunch of ships basically fall, and people drown in the ocean. The next day, we see 3 soldiers get on top of the mountain and try to overlook and see exactly the Persian camp. And when they do that, 2 of them are Spartans, and one of them is one of those regular Greek soldiers. They see how many Persians there are, and they're almost, the non-Spartan is terrified. He said, I thought we saw so many of them die the night before. And it's the Spartan who starts to giggle, and he laughs because he hopes that there's an adversary worthy enough to kill him. And, for the Spartans, this is a sort of glorious death to die in battle, defending, your culture, your city, your nation, your country, your family, all this stuff. And the reason why I think that's Logos is because of the emphasis in Christianity on martyrdom and sacrifice. And that martyrdom, this idea of standing up for Logos, for these values, for all these logoi, for all these virtues, standing up for those and never being timid or afraid despite persecution, is the way in which the tradition actually grew and spread. And to a degree, this is what's being hinted at by the Spartan, and which is going to be the case for the 300 Spartans who willingly die after knowing that, they've been sold out by the hunchback. So right there, we have martyrdom and sacrifice. Now we move to the next scene where we begin to see the battle's getting ready to take place, and the Persian emissary is moving forward, and he's coming. And he's coming forward, and he's being carried on a throne, and he has this whip, and he's whipping his own people, right? So he's being carried on the backs of men. Very symbolic. And what does he come up to? He comes up to a bunch of Spartans building a wall. And the Spartans say that this is the wall that our ancestors built. And it takes him a second, but then once the emissary realizes that a bunch of Persians have already been essentially used as mortar to build this wall, okay? And this is really interesting symbolism. I was thinking about this. What possibly could be the symbolic import of the Persians being used as mortar for the wall built by the ancestors, or being rebuilt by the Spartans, but originally built by their ancestors? And one of the things that I thought about, and again, I'm explicitly trying to find symbolism. So if this is over the top, that's fine. But it's the opposition. So that they're constructing a boundary, a wall, a border, and it is those that are in opposition to that border that actually allow the cohesion of that border or that wall or that barrier to exist. And it kind of insinuates the yin and yang dualism, that there has to be two for the kind of serpentine division in the middle there. I thought that was really interesting. And this leads to the Persian gets upset because they won't submit, and then he goes to whip one of the Spartans, and then the Spartan jumps up and cuts off his right hand. Obviously significant there. And he tells the emissary to go tell Xerxes that these are free men. We are not slaves, and we will essentially defend our freedom. And the emissary starts laughing and says, you're not going to be a slave. Your wife and children are going to be slaves. You're going to die. And that 1,000 nations of Persia are descending upon you, and that they're going to blot out the sun with their arrows. Okay, so what is the symbolic imports of that? I mean, we have already talked about in previous videos about the solar significance within the Christian tradition, about solar symbolism. And so right there, and again, I'm not trying to say that the authors of this movie are embedding Christian values. I'm just trying to talk about logos. And I think you can't get away from logos. That's why I converted to Christianity, because I think logos is the archetypes. It is the patterns that is embedded within narrative. It is the symbols. It is the meaning. And so the person who is representing this kind of God king in Xerxes wants to blot out the sun. The sun is the light of the world, right? It is the life force. And that's exactly what they want to do in order to kill the people who are, in my estimation, are representing logos. And so I just find that really, really interesting. And of course, the quip that the Spartan comes back with is that's fine, we'll fight in the shade. And I don't know, I thought that was really interesting. But let's move on to the next scene. Next scene is the Hunchback. And the Hunchback, it's Leonidas is on top of the mountain with his captain, and they're talking, and then all of a sudden the Hunchback appears, and the captain threatens to kill him if he gets any closer to Leonidas. Leonidas tells him to stop. And the Hunchback begins to tell Leonidas that his father was a Spartan and that he wanted to redeem essentially their honor, and he wanted to join them in battle. Now, this is for me, a very important scene in the movie, because it demonstrates some of the things that I've already mentioned. So Leonidas asked the Hunchback to lift up, it's on his left arm actually. He asked him to lift up his shield. He can't. And as soon as it's made clear that he can't, Leonidas says, you can't be a part of the Spartan army because you can't protect the man next to you. And this is all based on competency, right? So because he can't competently fight in the manner in which the Spartans fight, he can't be a part of the army. He can't handle that truth, right? He's literally in rejection of truth. That's a fact. And Leonidas says, if you want to help, you can bring food, you can pull bodies off the battlefield, you can do all these things that would still benefit them with what you can do. That's not suitable for him. He wants to have this identity. And because he can't be a Spartan soldier, he doesn't want to help at all. And so he throws his shield off the mountain, he throws his spear, and he says, "You are wrong, Mom and Dad." And then he says, "You are wrong, Leonidas." And so right there we have this sort of rejection of your mother and father, which, I mean, one of the 10 Commandments is to honor your mother and father. And then he is rejecting the truth that Leonidas actually told him. I mean, he can't fight in the military. So that's right there, a total rejection of these logoi, right? It's a rejection of truth. And it's interesting that his parents they actually fled Sparta. And what is the central tenet of a Spartan? You never retreat and you never surrender. And the fact that his parents, his father who was a Spartan and his mother, they actually fled Sparta also to protect him because he was so deformed, they were going to kill him as a baby. Interesting tension there. But anyways, they fled, and he's trying to redeem their honor because they fled Sparta. He can't, and he's in rejection, can't handle the truth. So this leads to... So then we have all these battle scenes, and I'm not going to talk about any of the specific battle scenes. I mean, visually they're really fun, but my favorite scene is the meeting between Xerxes and Leonidas. And what do we see? I mean, because this is, like, for me, the perfect archetypal representation of what I'm talking about logos versus essentially anti-logos. And we see Xerxes coming, and he's standing on this huge throne, and it's all on the backs of slaves. It's all these men that are carrying this God-man, this God-king. Whereas Leonidas stands there by himself as an individual. And Xerxes comes to... before they even start talking, what do you see? Well, right next to Xerxes, you see the heads of two horned animals. They kind of look like antelope, deer, something of that sort. And the horned entity is really important symbolically within religion. So obviously, you have goat-headed entities. You have Baphomet created by the Knights Templar. I believe that's around the 12th century when Baphomet is created. Don't quote me. You guys may need to correct me on that. But I believe it's around 12th century. But, you have like Cernunnos. Cernunnos is the ancient Irish horned deity, the kind of wild man that represents fertility and wealth. You have, of course, the devil has horns. Satan, Baphomet, Wicca is known for having a lot of horned animals, horned entities. And generally what this stuff represents is fertility and kind of the animalistic side of things, but also wealth. And I think that's really interesting because clearly Xerxes is representing wealth, but also, side note, for you people that have dove down some of the conspiracy theorist rabbit holes, you see, the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds participating in these sort of occultic rituals where they're wearing horned animal heads. So the tying into wealth there is pretty interesting. The tying in with like animalistic tendencies with like wealth, high-end culture wealth. I find that really interesting. But anyways, this is replete within religion, replete within mythology. Like it's all over the place. It's sort of an archetype, right? Which is one of the patterns of the Logos. And so what else do we see? We see Xerxes as a sort of androgynous figure. I'm not saying that he is androgynous, but he has makeup as eyebrows. He has makeup on his skin. He has jewelry everywhere. His nails are really long. He has essentially women's fingernails. And he kind of just holds himself in it's like a masculine but feminine way. So it's like this androgynous type occupation of his sexual identity, which is opposite of Logos, right? I mean, we have male and female. We have a bifurcation in gender and sex. And Xerxes is kind of representing a tension or, again, a dialectic against that logos or order. And then what also do we see? We see a god king versus a human warrior king. And the god king, Xerxes, tells him that he would kill his own men for victory. He would sacrifice his own men. Life doesn't mean anything. Loyalty doesn't mean anything. The fact that they're fighting for him, he doesn't care. He'll kill them if it means he can have what he wants. If he can have more power, he wants to control Greece. And what does Leonidas tell him? He says, I would die for my men. He would die for his. This sort of surrendering, this sort of sacrifice for other people. This is not is it not the crucifixion of Christ? The dying for other people. The exact opposite of sacrificing other people for what you want. So right there we have this immense dialectic right there between Xerxes and Leonidas. To me, logos versus anti-logos. Good versus evil, right? To me, it's very clear. It's very black and white here. And Leonidas tells Xerxes, of course, Xerxes trying to get him, telling him he can give him all the pleasures in the world. He can give him power. He can, he can be king over Athens. All he has to do is submit to Xerxes. Of course, he won't do that. And Leonidas tells Xerxes, you have many slaves, but you have few warriors. Because what are they fighting for? Right? This is a really important aspect, is like when you're in war, what are you fighting for? And the Spartans are clearly fighting for virtues. They're fighting for their freedom. They're fighting for all these things that I would call the Logoi. And again, Xerxes is a god who can give you anything with submission. And Leonidas ends by saying, the world will know free men stood against a tyrant, and that few men stood against many. And before this war is over, even a god king bleeds. So very, very interesting what he's saying there. Okay, so they're fighting a tyrant, the full centralization of power. Where as opposed to the full centralization of power, we have Sparta, which even though Leonidas was king, he could not even condone the going to war. Right? They had the council or the Senate. I'm not sure how they understood that in Sparta. Then you had the oracle, which is almost like a third branch of their government, or however you want to understand their system, their kind of Greek pagan system. But then you had the king, the warrior king, and you see how there's a side of diffusion of power within Sparta, whereas in Persia has this immense centralization. And he is a tyrant, no doubt. And that few stood against many. This is almost biblical, right? There's, Judges chapter 6 is something that I wanted to reference in terms of Gideon's 300 fighting the 100,000 of the Midianites. So this few against many, it's right there in the Old Testament. It's even there in the New Testament. What is the 12 verse of the world, the 12 apostles, So few will stand against many, and even a God king bleeds because it's created. A God king is not God. God does not bleed. Christ bled because he is full God taking full human form. That's how you would understand that. But anyways, that's kind of the going and back, the back and forth between Leonidas and Xerxes. Then you have an immense fighting scene, yada, 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 and that kind of ends with the captain losing his son, who's beheaded by a Persian soldier. And you see this kind of emotional, horrific plea of a father losing his son in war. A father who is very stoic and hardly even gave any type of emotional clues, emotional relationship to his son. And this becomes apparent later in the video here that I want to get to. But they have this immense fighting scene. The captain's son dies. Next, we get the hunchback going to Xerxes. So the hunchback who is deformed, and his physical deformity, I think, symbolically is representing the deformity of his soul, right? Because he's the one that betrays. And so he goes to Xerxes because he can't handle the truth that he can't be a Spartan because he can't lift his shield to protect the person next to him, which from the beginning of this video, right? The Spartan strength comes from the warrior next to you. This is what Leonidas tells his son. So the hunchback, he can't handle the truth. He ends up going to Xerxes and submits to him and shows him the backway passage behind the Spartans in which that will allow them to be conquered. When you go with the scene, when it goes in there, what are you seeing? You're seeing at one was like a goat-headed hominid. You see this like goat-headed individual playing a sort of instrument. You see women making out with each other, sort of lesbian activity. You see very sexual. You see gold everywhere. You basically you see all these things that you see androgynous people. You see all these things that are almost anti-logos, right? That there's a correct order, and that Sparta almost represents the correct order. Leonidas certainly is representing this in the movie. Not that he is Christ or anything or representing Christ in that figure, in that understanding. Although I will get to the very end where he takes on a kind of imagery of a Christ figure. You see this and these androgynous people, women making out. And Xerxes tells the hunchback that, the Spartans were cruel to reject you. Well, what is their cruelty? Is that they had a standard. They had a boundary. They had a barrier. They had something to uphold, a level of competency. And because they had that and they weren't willing to break that, which would actually be detrimental to their own safety and their own efficacy, that somehow that's cruel. Whereas in what is not cruel is the betraying and the selling out. And that, Xerxes tells the hunchback that he can give him anything he wants, any worldly pleasure, anything like that. And the hunchback sells out. And somehow this is not cruel, when in reality, when it comes back full circle and Leonidas tells the hunchback that he hopes he lives forever, what is more cruel than essentially dishonoring yourself, in which you'll always be in shame? I mean, that's arguably one of the most cruel things you can do. In fact, we often do it to ourselves, and the hunchback essentially does it to himself. So, and then one of the lines in that scene that I really like is Xerxes tells the hunchback, he says, "Leonidas requires that you stand. I require that you kneel." And so this idea that the Spartans require that you stand for something, that you fight, that you move against the grain. Whereas Xerxes, the man god, the anti-logos, the sort of demonic, magical energy that kind of runs this planet, it just asks you to kneel. It asks you to submit and not fight against it. And that is the difference between Xerxes and Leonidas. And eventually another fight scene goes by. I think it's like another 20, 30 minutes or so. And one of the leader of the general Greek army there, that, they're not Spartans, they're not very good, although there's 1,000 of them or so, comes to Leonidas and tells him that they've been sold out, that part of their army has been totally wiped out, that the immortals and the hunchback has told Xerxes, and that the immortals are coming around the backside, and that he and the rest of the Greek army is going back. They're retreating. And Leonidas yells at the soldiers, "Spartans, prepare for glory. Prepare for glory, because you don't retreat and you don't surrender." And that's exactly what is about to happen. So he says during that episode, I highly recommend anybody re-listening to this scene. It's really interesting. And he says that a new age has begun, an age of freedom, that 300 will die to defend it. 300 Spartans will die to defend it. And what are they defending? They're defending freedom, their family, and their friends. And the New Age, ironically, of course, Leonidas couldn't know this, but the New Age is when Sparta and Greece essentially beats Persia. I mean, there is a sort of resurrection there that I'll get to here in a second. And then the captain who lost his son comes in, and he says that he never had regret except for not telling his son that he loved him the most and that he fought next to him with honor. So we have love and honor resurfacing again, and that is the only regret the captain has, is that he didn't tell his son that he loved him the most, or I assume just loved him at all. So then this moves to, we're almost done here, this moves to the queen, and she actually sleeps with the kind of the backstabbing councilman there that's goes in and out through the whole entire movie. She allows him to, have sex with her right there in the street against a corner, in the hopes that he will then allow her, because she's speaking in front of the councilman, she already paid one guy off, and that he, by allowing him to sleep with her, he will agree to going to war against Persia. Of course, that backfires, and he betrays her. And again, I think this is logos. This is archetypal and symbolic. The fact that she sold herself, which is sinful, and in turn, what did she get? She got betrayed. Because you can't go again, like if she would have maintained her chastity in regards to Leonidas or her, and not partake in these activities, he couldn't have backstabbed her in the same way. He couldn't have totally humiliated her in front of the other congressmen. Of course, then she takes out the sword and kills him. And then they see all the Persian money that he had, because he was responsible for also paying off the priest and the oracle, and essentially had already been bought off by Persia. So that becomes clear. That also symbolizes how going away from logos, going away from these traditional values, what in Christianity we call sin, it only leads to more sin. So that happened. And then the very end of this movie is that Leonidas fakes submission, and the whole Xerxes, the whole Persian army is in front of him. All the archers are on the top of the mountain. They're looking down at the Spartans, and Leonidas is the only one out there in front, not protected by the shield. Then he throws his shield down, he throws his spear down, takes his helmet off, and he acts like he's submitting to Xerxes, and Xerxes is just all excited. And then he yells at the Spartans, and then they run out and spear the guy in front of him. And then Leonidas throws a spear and actually scrapes the right side of Xerxes' mouth. And also, when Leonidas kills a sort of giant, in one of the fight scenes, there's like this giant monstrosity of a kind of a humanoid / monster thing. It's almost symbolic of David and Goliath. But when he stabs him, he stabs that monster in the right eye, the right side, right side. He stabs the guy in the right eye, and then he beheads him. And then when he throws a spear at Xerxes, it's the right cheek that gets sliced. I find that interesting. And then, all the arrows are shot, and everybody's end up being killed. But how is Leonidas depicted at the end? With his arms stretched out in sort of a Christ figure. So this is where I think the whole thing comes full circle, where now we see the self-sacrifice of Leonidas for the values of the Logoi, or the virtues of the Logos, and now he's depicted in a sort of Christ-like manner with his arms stretched out, like as if he was being crucified. So that is basically my take on the movie 300. And of course, at the end there, the gentleman with the one eye, Aristodemus, I believe is his name, I forget. The guy who ends up being the narrator of the whole movie, he goes back to tell, Leonidas before the battle scene tells him to go back to tell everybody to remember. And when they're getting ready to charge back into battle, this is where they actually defeat Persia, Greece does. He says that they are to rescue the world from mysticism and tyranny. And I couldn't help but think that was really powerful. Now, preferably, I would have chosen a different word than mysticism. I would have chosen magic, because Eastern Christianity, the Orthodox Church, is considered the mystical church. I don't think there's anything negative with mysticism per se, but it says that they're going to rescue the world from mysticism and tyranny. I think magic and tyranny would have been more apropos, but even given what they were talking about, you kind of can see how those things go together, and how, in my opinion, the movement away from Logos and Logos theology, it always leads to the centralization and the growth of political or governmental power. And it's true everywhere in the world. And the only places where smaller government exists, where more human freedom exists, is where the Logos is present and people are living according to those values. And so that is my take on the movie 300. And to end, I thought it would be appropriate to read from Ephesians 6:10 through 12. This is about putting on the armor of God. So this is Ephesians 6, chapter 6, verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. So that is this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Do you think there's aspects that I missed? What is your guys' opinions on the movie 300? Do you agree with my general premise here that the whole movie is a sort of Logos versus anti-Logos? That is how I'm perceiving it, and I think that it's fairly apparent once you see it, but I'm not claiming that any of the directors or the producers of the movie 300 had that in mind. I just think that because they went with these, I think it's almost at a subconscious thing, because the Logos is archetypes and is patterns, it can't help but work its way out in the way that it did. So that's my general premise. That's my thesis. Let me know what you guys think. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, until next time, God bless.